Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Katie Hebert, and I'm a policy analyst at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, and I will be your moderator for today's discussion. I want to thank our partners at the Addiction Technology Transfer Center Network and the Center for Health and Justice at Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities for co-sponsoring this webinar with us today. I'd like to briefly talk through a couple of house cleaning items about how the webinar is going to work before we get started. Anytime during this webinar, you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will keep a running list of the content-related questions that we receive, and then we will ask the panelists to respond to these questions during the last segment of the webinar. We're going to do our best to get through as many questions as possible today. If you encounter technical or audio problems during this webinar, please feel free to call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. Please understand that there are some technical issues that we may not be able to resolve, and for this reason, we are recording this event, and we'll post it on our website at www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. We should have the webinar posted online early next week. And once it has been posted, you will receive an email that will include a link to this recording. This is a snapshot of the Resource Center's homepage. We are constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we also send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, funding opportunities, distance learning events such as this one, and other news about reentry. To sign up for this newsletter, if you are not already signed up, please feel free to visit the link that you see in front of you on your screen after today's webinar. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I just want to provide a bit of background information regarding this webinar. In my work with the Reentry Resource Center, one of the things that we often hear as one of the most challenging aspects of the reentry program is effectively retaining clients in community treatment and engaging families. I think, as we all know, engaging clients in community treatment after incarceration is extremely important, as it increases recovery rates as well as contributes to decreasing recidivism rates, both of which are extremely important to the reentry process. As a result of these common challenges, the NRRC, in partnership with TASC and ATTC, is bringing you a 5-part webinar series on client engagement in community substance abuse treatment. Today's webinar is the second part in the series, focusing on reentry planning to support post-release engagement and retention in community treatment. We hope you participate in all of the webinars and participate in a dialogue on how to effectively engage clients in treatment post-release. We also have archived the first webinar, which you can find on our website as well. I would now like to introduce our featured speaker for this afternoon. Our presenter for today's webinar is Linda Gatson-Rowe. She's the Administrator of Corrections Transition Programs at TASC, and we are thrilled to have her today. Linda oversees TASC services for more than 1,000 individuals in Illinois each year who are incarcerated or returning to their communities following incarceration. Since joining TASC in 2007, Mrs. Gatson-Rowe has been instrumental in designing and managing programs that help individuals transition from their involvement in corrections to self-sufficiency in the community, implementing changes in systems and processes. In collaboration with Illinois Department of Corrections, she plays a key role in implementing prison reentry programs that have successfully reduced recidivism rates in Illinois. We're thrilled to have Mrs. Gatson-Rowe with us here today, and with that, I'd now like to turn the webinar over to Linda, who's going to say a few words about our co-sponsors to begin her comments. Linda?
Thank you, Katie. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar. It's my pleasure to present today. The slide you're looking at is basically one of the co-sponsors, ATTC. Is a network that's funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administrations, and they serve a critical role in improving the health of our nation. There you'll see 3 of their mission statements. And if you're looking for further information, I would encourage you to go to their website, which is attcnetwork.org. The other co-sponsor today with whom I work with is TASC, which stands for Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities. TASC has over 30 years of experience working with integrated systems between the criminal justice and health in the state of Illinois. We pride ourselves on being a bridge for people involved both in the criminal justice system, behavioral health treatment systems, as well as recovery. One of the key services that we provide is the case management service. Our case manager's role is to keep people engaged in treatment, which helps, of course, to improve their chances of successful recovery, as well as we maintain accountability with all of our criminal justice systems, whether it be the Department of Corrections, parole, or probation. Just going to go briefly outline of what our presentation will be today. I'm going to talk to you about the comprehensive reentry planning process. How do we time reentry with the completion of treatment, and then how do we involve families into our transitional planning as individuals are transitioning back into the community. My hope is that by the end of this presentation, this training, you'll be able to identify some key components of a multidisciplinary staffing, the importance of multidisciplinary staffing with clinical and community corrections, as well as the importance of engaging families in the recovery planning process and how best to time reentry with treatment completion. Comprehensive reentry planning process has many components. Some of the ways in which you can identify if you are involved in or how best some of the indicators for knowing whether you are involved currently in our comprehensive reentry planning process is that they're oftentimes strengths-based. Strengths-based just means that the entire planning process includes the client or the parolee or the probationer, depending on what field you're working from, and it's through a supportive relational model that emphasizes the client's strengths, their abilities, and assets, while reducing at the same time barriers to treatment and recovery. Treatment should target factors that are associated with the criminal's behavior. Here, referring to, does the person have values and or beliefs that support their continued criminal behavior once they're released into the community, or was the criminal behavior directly a result of their addiction? Services should also be tailored to fit the needs of the individual. Based upon the assessment that was originally done upon entry into the system, input from our clinical and correctional staff, input from family, from the healthcare provider and mental health, all that input along with input from the individual, the client, to help identify the areas of need, and then those areas of need should be prioritized with the input from the client in setting the priority. Also, continuity of care is important, and it begins upon entry into the criminal justice system and not shortly before release. Oftentimes we find that the planning for reentering society or reentering the community does not begin to happen until close to the end. It's important that all of the information from the time of orientation, induction, kind of begins to build itself towards the plans for reentry. So it begins at the front end and not at the back. Our comprehensive reentry planning process should be engaging and outreach-oriented. Outreach means that it is not just operating within our own agency, but reaching out from, if you're on the inside, reaching out into the community, whether that's to the treatment providers, whether that's to probation, whether that's to the various governmental systems that will provide some type of service to the individual that you're currently working with. And then how do we help engaging, then how do we keep the client focused on the goals that he or she will set prior to entering into the community? It's important that the continuity of care is essential for people with substance abuse issues re-entering the community, meaning that at the point when they begin preparing to leave, it's important that the individuals have an idea already. They know where they're going. They know what their first few days are going to look like. What are my appointments? Are those appointments already scheduled? Instead of releasing the individual with plans for him or her to schedule those things for themselves in the community. So a comprehensive reentry plan involves pulling all stakeholders together. Ideally, it would start about 120 days prior to release, and I'm assuming that these are either long-term Treatment centers, of course, we know that there are circumstances or situations that does not always allow us to have 120 days prior to an individual, 120 days notice prior to an individual being released for us to do the staffing, but 120 days is ideal. Anytime shortly thereafter upon notification would be not too soon to start that staffing. So the sooner the better. The staffing helps to ensure the comprehensive reentry planning process also should have a place in it that ensures that the identified services are actually being delivered, meaning that if I have contracted or agreed to provide case management services out in the community for clients that are being released from your treatment center, from your prisons, from your jails, then there needs to be some level of accountability to show where I can provide that I am providing those actual services. Usually we operate here in the state of Illinois. We do have a common reporting document. Our common reporting document here in the state, in the state of Illinois, we have what's called a continuing care plan. And the continuing care plan is a document. It's about 9 pages, and each page represents a different entity, a different part of the individual's lives, whether it's psychosocial, vocational, his mental health. There's a place in there for the client to provide any collateral contact information. All of it is provided pre-release, provided pre-release prior to release into the community. There is a central collection and dissemination area for that data. In our case, it actually is tasked. For example, we have pre-release staff inside of the prisons, inside of the jails, who actually disseminates this information to the various entities once we are made aware that an individual is going to be released. We disseminate the information. We request dates for release, what the crime was, any parole board order specifications. We find out, are there any mental health or medical issues, not necessarily the diagnosis, but are there issues and has appointments or will appointments be scheduled in the community prior to this person leaving? Where would those appointments be? We find out what vocational accomplishments they've made. What is their level of education? What is their biopsychosocial? What did they come in? What was their diagnosis? What was their drug of choice? How many times have they been incarcerated? What is the family support like? When we can't contact the client, who can we contact? Who is the client giving us permission to contact? What level of treatment will this client parole to in the community, and has that treatment been set up? So all of that information is collected through a common reporting document provided through a central collection agency who disseminates that information. It's not only disseminated inside of the facility, but it's also disseminated into the community to those individuals who have appointments, wherever appointments have been scheduled, whether it's a halfway house, whether it's an outpatient facility, whether it's a mental health facility. All of those community partners receive a copy of this comprehensive reentry planning document. It's very key that the criminal justice system is aware of what treatment is requiring of the individual, and it's just as important that the treatment providers are aware of what the correctional supervision's requirements are. I want to talk a little bit about what is a multidisciplinary staffing. A multidisciplinary staffing is a group composed of staff from various organizations. As I mentioned, the Department of Corrections. It could be from treatment, mental health, probation, parole, family, vocational, educational. They have varied but complementary interests in the successful transitioning of an individual back into their respective communities and their ongoing success. Where the staffings are held doesn't matter, preferably while they are involved in the inside services, whether those services are jails, prisons, or whether they're substance abuse treatment facilities. Preferably the services are held there. They can also be held at community-based organizations, and I'll give an example of one of those that our agency currently does. What is the purpose and how do they work, multidisciplinary staffing? They provide a complete picture of a client. It kind of helps the client to be able to not play one agency against the other. It also gives us an opportunity to network and correlate our services without providing more services than needed, as well as making sure that as the case manager in this case, if I was the case manager, I would know that this is a client that does have some mental health issues, and this is where this individual goes. This is the last time they had their prescription filled. These are some of the side effects so that I know things to look for. So it helps to give me a complete picture of who this client is, his educational level. And then it's an opportunity, great opportunity for the cross-sharing of information. Oftentimes we find that we have common clients, but we don't share information. So the multidisciplinary staffing is an opportunity for cross-sharing. It's important too. I think I've missed that, but one of the things that's truly important is that another key player at the multidisciplinary staffing is the client. This is not where decisions are made and then the client is brought in. The client is a part of the decisions, the input from the beginning. The client does not get to dictate or determine the final decision of where they will receive treatment or what their next level of care will be or the final prioritizing of goals, but they do have a weigh in and provide some input in that. And so the other purpose is to provide a comprehensive reentry planning document. Timing reentry with treatment completion. The very first part, timing of treatment should be near the back end of the sentence, if at all possible. That makes the reentry planning process more seamless. That way we don't have an individual who goes into treatment and then go back, for example, into general population or back into the mainstreams of things and then have to then be released into the community. So it's preferable that treatment happens towards the end of a person's stay. We want to avoid sending the inmate back to finish time after their treatment is done. Forward progress only is what we encourage. Phase 1 and 2 happens inside the institutions. Phase 3 here, the reentry phase, should begin inside and it'll follow the offender into the community. The kickoff for moving a person to phase 3 in the previous example I shared about the 120-day staffing, it is during phase 3 and phase 4 that a strong clinical case management model is needed. This is where the reentry planning process becomes active. And I'll talk a little bit more on the next 2 slides about the case management model that we currently use. Phase 5 happens once the individual no longer is required to report to any parole, probation, or criminal justice systems or community-based organization. During the initial period between release and initial stabilization in the community, monitoring will be at an intensive level. The intensity of the case management is dictated by the progress of a client. When you look at our high-intensity case management model, it's ideally the first 90 days post-release. It's implemented at junctures of vulnerability, and we'll look at some of those junctures of vulnerability. But implemented at junctures of vulnerability and designed to stabilize the formerly incarcerated person in this example in the community. The person is stepped down, meaning they move to a less intensive level of case management once they achieve certain behavioral indicators, and we'll also take a brief look at what some of those indicators would be. The second level of case management we use is what we consider our regular case management. With regular case management, there's a minimum of 4 contacts required per month. Ideally, it's between the 90 and 180 days after the individual has been released into the community. And it's implemented for those who are fairly stable in the community and working towards achieving some of the goals that they established prior to entering the community. This person, again, is stepped down once they achieve certain behavioral indicators. Some of the junctures of vulnerability that I mentioned earlier is whenever there's an increase in case management intensity, it's usually due to either them being released from the institution, of course, that's where we start out with high intensity. Whenever they're in a recovery home or a structured living arrangement, if the individual was to relapse, that's considered a juncture of vulnerability. Whenever they're non-compliance with treatment, meaning their attendance and participation is lacking. When they're unsuccessfully discharged from treatment, and of course with positive drug drops, ongoing unemployment, loss of family members or significant others, unstable housing, parole violations, those are just some of the junctures of vulnerability. Now what happens based upon the junctures of vulnerability, the person can be stepped down or up in their level of case management. In response to that, there are also certain services that the case manager would provide. For example, they could increase the phone contact with the individual. They could increase their face-to-face contacts in the community and office. They could have increased family or significant other contacts, increased contacts with treatment. They could attempt to engage the individual in faith-based support groups or housing and employment services. They may even want to verify their employment or their employment schedule. And they can do an assessment of their support systems network to determine if it's still working, and even to provide some mentoring activities as well. The third level of case management that we provide is the recovery support. And this is where they're having a minimum of 1 month. And these are usually for individuals who are doing well. They've stabilized in the community. They found employment or returned to school. They have stable housing. These are individuals who have completed their treatment, who have had no new arrests, and who have maintained compliance with all other criminal justice reporting agencies. And it ideally lasts for about 6 months and begins about 6 months once they've been released. Some of the behavioral indicators, we taught behavioral indicators for step down. From high intensity, those would be like stable treatment, stable housing, compliance, negative drug tests in the last 45 days. And so that individuals meeting those requirements within 45 days, within 90 days, would be stepped down to our regular case management where they would be there for another 90 days. If during that second 90-day period of post-release services, you complete all your treatment, you've been employed, negative drug tests, stable housing, those things are all going on. Then we step you down into our recovery support with 6 months of monitoring once a month with the expectation of successful discharging you from treatment. Let me just go back one. Successfully discharging you, not just from treatment, but also from our task case management model, as well as recommending. In our case, we recommend parolees for early release from parole as a result of meeting all the requirements of task. Successful discharge here, currently drug-free and has been drug-free for at least 90 days following the completion of treatment. No new convictions or technical violations, and not currently incarcerated on any new felony or technical violation, in addition to other indicators agreed upon by the individual and the case manager. So for our purposes, for purposes of task, what we realized is that our clients needed and wanted something very specific coming out of the institutions into the community. They needed to know from us exactly 1, 2, 3, 4, what are the things I need to do? And we realized that our clients needed to have some choice, wanted to feel some sense of input in the things that they needed to do. So we came up with a list of 4 things that all of our clients, 4 requirements all clients must meet. And then we have a list of 7 additional items that a client can pick 3 out of the 7 to meet. The ones that are required is the client has successfully completed treatment, and that's excluding detox. They're currently drug-free, has been for at least 90 days, no new convictions or new felony, no technical violations, and that they're currently not incarcerated, of course. But here they get to decide, out of these others that I'll mention, which ones they wanted to meet. And here they are. The client is involved in a recovery support group. That was one option. The other was the client has a stable living environment. He must have lived in the same place for 30-plus days and can stay there for the foreseeable future. Also, our client had to have at least some family or peers who are supportive of his recovery. He's working or looking for work, or is in school or applying to enter school was another option he had. The client has some form of legitimate income, because we do realize that not all of our clients are going to find jobs or return to school, but they had to have some form of legitimate, what's the key word, legitimate income. The client's physical health we wanted to be stable, and or he had a viable plan to address any health issues that he had, and the client's mental health as well had to be stable if there are any mental health issues. So those were the client would have to pick 4 out of 7 of those. So it gave us a very concrete way of measuring success across the board for all of our clients. I'm going to prepare to transition over into talking about the family involvement. How do we get families involved, which is one of our big challenges. The family disease model maintains that addiction is a family disease, and it stresses the family to the breaking point. It impacts the stability of the home, the family's unity, mental health, physical health, finances, and overall family dynamics. Now factor into that incarceration into the equation. No family is born with the knowledge of how to deal with effectively with addiction, incarceration, and its many other impacts on the family. Just as with addiction, the family relationships are strained and people become anxious and distrustful, tired, and overwhelming sense of hopelessness sets in. The same holds true for families when they become hopeless that the addicted member will ever get it right, stop going in and out of treatment centers, stop going in and out of jails and or prisons. Because addiction, jails, and incarceration hurts the family, it's absolutely essential that reentry plans are designed to include the family. The disease model holds that based upon the idea that the families become organized around their interactions with the substance abuser. We are familiar with the whole codependent, also, the disease model holds that limited control research evidence is available to support the family disease model, but it is nonetheless influential in the treatment community as well as the general public, meaning there's so little research out there about the disease model, how best to include families into our reentry planning process, but we know that they are a key component, and we'll be able to see that in just the impact of it. We're going to talk about when planning to engage families in reentry, we need to discuss some of the challenges of implementing family strengthening programs in prisons and at reentry. We'll talk about the effects of incarceration on the families, utilizing the family as a natural source to enhancing our efforts at reentry planning, and some techniques for involving the family in all phases of reentry planning. First, some of the challenges. There's numerous challenges to implementing programs that strengthen families and help families to become a part of the reentry process. In a broad sense, when you think about it, some of the difficulties is with building partnerships with community-based organizations. Corrections and human services agencies have very different roles and priorities. And they can impede the implementation of a family strengthening efforts with incarcerated and reentering individuals. Correctional institutions prioritize public safety, which carries an emphasis on controlling all movement and activities within their facilities for the protection of the inmates, staff, and visitors and the public, whereas human service agencies, by contrast, emphasize meeting the needs of your clients, which necessitates a focus on the individual's well-being and self-determination. One of the second barriers is the barrier of getting families involved. Correctional agencies' inherent emphasis on security and safety also creates a barrier to involving family members in programming delivered within prison walls. Any contact or exchange of information between the incarcerated individuals and non-incarcerated individuals is potentially problematic from a security standpoint and requires monitoring by correctional staff, which in a time of increased prisoner population and decreasing funding for prison staff has the potential to strain both the budget and the individual staff members. Facility staff may view family members as both an inconvenience and a threat to security. As a result, they're less likely to encourage new programs that bring family members into the prison and may treat participants in existing family programs in a manner that subtly discourages the continued participation. Geographic distance from prisons, busy schedules, and poor relationships serve as barriers to family involvement in prison programs as well. When we look at retention and recruitment of incarcerated participants, large numbers of inmates transfers between facilities, they release early, frequent residential moves upon release. The likelihood of reincarceration and the fragility of family relationships make retention and follow-up evaluation difficult. And then stigma in group settings is also challenging when it comes to trying to have families involved, as most family strengthening programs in prisons take place in a group setting. They face barriers related to stigmatization. Asking men, for example, to share their thoughts in a group setting on difficult issues involving their children is a challenge. Pressure to be unemotional or to disrespect ex-partners may interfere with their ability to express their actual feelings about fatherhood or their relationship. Another challenge to implementing family involvement is connecting with supportive services post-release. It is important for released prisoners to continue participating in programs that support their families and other social services after reentry. Continued participation may help encourage the use of knowledge and skills gained while incarcerated, yet prisoners are often released without links to community-based services. Human service agencies often have little connection with the criminal justice system and do not have any formal mechanisms for sharing information about families in need. Resources may not be available to support community-based service deliveries due to cost and uncertain release dates. Other barriers, which include a lack of service coordination between community and prison-based organizations due to long distances between the prison and the community where the family resides, and the different funding streams for programming within and outside of the correctional system. And then we have the cultural sensitivity barrier. Although a high percentage of incarcerated fathers, for example, are of ethnic minority, very few family programs in prisons or surrounding reentry have been designed with cultural issues in mind. Those programs that have addressed culture have reported positive reactions from participants. And last but not least, one of the other challenges is the limited research, and we touched on that briefly earlier. Several challenges to the implementation of family strengthening programs in prisons and upon reentry have been identified. Recommendations for improving implementations have been made based on descriptive and anecdotal information. Identification of challenges has rarely involved actual surveys of programs or correctional staff. Research has not yet tested the extent to which the identified barriers to implementation impacts the effectiveness of programs, nor the extent to which it addresses the difficulties and the various barriers to program implementation. So those are some of the challenges we have when we're trying to work with families during reentry that are involved in the criminal justice system. The effect of incarceration on families. Incarceration and involvement with the juvenile and criminal justice systems have become an all too common experience for an increasing number of families in the United States. These numbers, however, do not capture the full impact of incarcerations on families and neighborhoods. Families experience significant losses during a family member's incarceration, such as the loss of wage-earning household members, parenting partners, sources of emotional support. These losses extend beyond the period of incarceration. For example, an offender returning to a neighborhood from prison may be stigmatized due to their criminal justice involvement and regarded as someone the community member distrusts or fears, impacting the offender's family standing in the community, leading to exclusion from the neighborhood associations or other economic activity. This type of stigma and ostracism can be imposed on a family by the neighborhood and on an entire neighborhood or community by the larger society. As difficult as the period of incarceration active addiction is on families, the return home and reentry into the recovery process presents new challenges and also impacts the families. Families experience a sense of strain resulting from financial hardship from supporting an additional family member, of course, relationships problems or interpersonal conflict due to the offender's return or the addict's return to their household, such as dealing with the emotional concerns of a family member who may have been previously victimized by the offender or the addict, or strained relationships between the offender, the addict, or the children who may not understand why their parent was absent. Changes in the family dynamics are other problems that the offender or the addict has to return to, such as the new patterns of authority, feelings of anxiety, anger, frustration, disappointment, begins to return to use, and the offender begins to return to using drugs as a result, or returns to criminal behavior while living in the community. And then, of course, taking on new responsibilities as a result of the offender's criminal justice status. For instance, family members may be expected to talk with parole officers, assist in monitoring whether the offender is following parole conditions, or install a home phone line for an electronic monitoring device. All of these are ways in which the incarcerated person's life impacts the family negatively. Families as a natural resource. Families can serve as a critical partner to corrections and supervision agencies in a number of ways. Family members have an intimate knowledge and understanding of each other and are frequently available to provide support or intervention at hours, days, or nights when our agencies are closed. Family support does not cost money to access, and unlike most programs and services, also, family members usually share regional, ethnic, and family cultures, which is not necessarily true of the agencies or organizational staffs that provide the services or the supervision. So what does the research say about outcomes of using families to enhance reentry efforts? According to outcome research from the 2010 Centers for Effective Public Health during the initial reentry phase, families are the major provider of housing, which is most critical and immediate concern upon reentry. Aside from employment, families are the most common source of financial support. Many will use family members or relatives, etc., in order to secure a job. They rely heavily on family for transportation needs once they are living in the community. In a vast majority of cases, family members have taken over the responsibility of child rearing while the person is absent. And family members provide emotional support to offenders during stressful, transitional times in their lives. And a survey of offenders in prison cited that family support was important to keeping them from recidivating. 58% of incarcerated respondents reported that family support was important in helping them to avoid returning to prison. That is awesome. 58% of incarcerated respondents reported that family support was important in helping them to avoid returning to prison or drug use. And 71% of respondents in the community noted family support as critical to recidivating. So 58% while they were incarcerated saw family as being very important to their not returning to prison, and 71% once they were released in the community stated that family support was of critical importance. Research shows that family support can positively also impact the intermediate reentry phase outcomes, such as avoiding drug and alcohol abuse or finding employment. The simple perception of support can be a powerful motivator. Literature shows that offenders who perceive that they have close family relations, for example, they believe their family will assist them with housing or financial support, or that their families will accept them, they exhibit better employment and substance abuse outcomes. In addition to successful intermediate reentry outcomes, family relationships also play a role in keeping individuals from returning to crimes and drugs after long-term reentry. Perhaps the most consistent finding in literature is that the more contact adult participants have with their families while incarcerated during visitations, phone calls, mail, the less likely they are to recidivate. So here, families are definitely a natural source for enhancing our reentry efforts. I also believe it's a missed opportunity. While the research examining the impact of family relationships on reentry outcomes is still in its infancy, studies show that families are indeed important to offenders successfully achieving their goals, including reducing recidivism. Some techniques that we can use for involving family in all phases of treatment. When individuals enter the institution, the assessment process should not only provide an opportunity for the agency to collect information on offenders' risk and criminogenic needs, but more comprehensive information about their families as well. Engage the individual through open-ended questions, to gather more detailed information about their lives. Case planning and management states that once the assessment is complete, it's important that the information about the offender's family support feeds into the development of a case plan. Use the information about the families to strengthen the development of a case plan and in helping to determine how family support can strengthen and address the offender's criminogenic needs. Are there any family conflict, any antisocial values? All of that can be gained and gathered from that dialogue with the offender during the actual family assessment part of it. Throughout their incarceration, facility staff can support increased family ties by reinforcing positive relationships with family members and other pro-social supports, encouraging offenders to call and or write to family members and other members of their social network. For those who are parents, case management staff might ask the inmates their concerns regarding their children while they're incarcerated, for example, how they might deal with the separation from their children, how to make decisions regarding the child's care and placement, and how to maintain contact with their child during incarceration. The case management staff can provide the offender with legal services regarding child custody and or the termination of parental rights proceedings. Some other techniques for involving family during incarceration phase is through family visitation. This is critical in maintaining family ties. Correctional facility staff might assist offenders in maintaining contact with their families by building visitation into the incarcerated individual's regular routine, not using the contact with family as leverage or consequences for misconduct. They can employ staff in the reception and visitation area based on their skills in interacting with family, offer visitation hours outside of regular work hours. They can keep family members informed of policies and events, and those are some of the things that we as community-based organizations who have an arm of us that work inside these facilities can do as well. Send information to families with the most up-to-date visitation policies and procedures. Assign case managers to be present to meet families during visitation and answer their questions. Provide incentives for families to stay engaged in their offenders' lives. For example, host formal or informal events to encourage families to visit the facility, graduation, holiday parties. Provide or help to assure transportation is available for families, and offer the use of video, which is one of the newer things, video teleconferencing for long-distance visitation and parent-teacher conferences. During the transitional phase, as part of a sound case management process, prison and community supervision staff and their partners should share important information about offenders before they're released into community. And to assist with the transition phase while offenders are still incarcerated, we can develop partnerships to ensure that the strategies of continuity of care are in place before the offenders are released. We can notify family members of the expected release date to allow them sufficient time to prepare. Meet with the incarcerated individual pre-release. To conduct additional assessments that capture current family strength and social support. Sometimes things change from the time of incarceration until by the time the individual is getting ready to release into the community. There are new changes, so an additional assessment is not a bad idea. Begin release planning early again in this phase. Offer classes or resources for the families of offenders, and those classes can either be offered in the community or maybe in the visiting center at some of the institutions. And prepare offenders who are parents for reunifying with their children and taking over parental responsibility again. Provide parenting class to clients prior to release. Offer information on how to deal with court-ordered child support payments when they return to the community. And the last phase is our community phase. Once the offenders are released to the community, supervision staff can ensure that the offender's risk level guides the level and type of supervision and programming in the community, which I addressed earlier, and looking at the various levels of case management. They can review the offender's case plan and assessment domains about current family strength and social supports. Use open-ended interviewing techniques with offenders and their families to gather more details about how their current family life is. Conduct orientation sessions for offenders and their families, emphasizing the importance of family support to successful reentry, answering questions and addressing any concerns that the family members may have. And then create a strength-based goals with offenders and their family members, noting how offenders with their family's help will achieve their goal. And last but not least, familiarize themselves with offenders' families, strengths, and challenges in order to address conflicts or duplication of services and to make appropriate referrals for family members to other human service agencies. Thank you. That is all that I have. Katie?
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. We really appreciate all of the information that you shared. It was certainly great. I think what we'll do now, we'll move into the questions and answer period. And right now, we have a bunch of questions coming in, but I just want to remind everybody that you can still ask a question just by going to your control panel on the right side towards the bottom. There's a Q&A panel, and you can go ahead and type in there, and we'll see your question, and we'll go ahead and ask it. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So to start, we had a question that came in about caseloads for case managers in terms of doing this kind of intensive case management and stepping down. What would be sort of your recommendation or thoughts for maybe appropriate caseloads in this instance?
The ideal caseload is 40 to 1. 40 to 1, and there's a great chance that probably about half of that caseload, half of that 40 would be at the high intensity. The way we currently do it in our agency and task, we have our average caseload is 40 to 1 is what we shoot for, and we have case managers that manage at the high intensity and at the regular caseload level. And then when they get to the recovery support where there is a monthly contact, then that is oftentimes either moved to what we call a recovery support specialist, or in some cases our support staff will manage that once a month phone call.
Great. Thank you. For the next question, we have one about families. And you had talked a lot about the family disease model as well as when families can be used as strengths. And so we got a question about, sort of when in the process are you finding information out about the family and sort of what the strengths are, or on the reverse side, maybe if the family wouldn't be a great source of strength, as well as sort of how you're defining family and pro-social support.
Okay. Oftentimes, we start gathering. I've worked inside of the prison, medium security, 1,500-bed dedicated drug treatment prison for a number of years. And oftentimes, while working on the orientation hall, we would first begin to hear about families when we're actually doing the assessment, when we're asking about medical history, when we're asking about what are your forms of support. So it actually begins at the on-site, but the way the state of Illinois is set up, we actually have a central receiving and classification unit, which TAS has staff that is posted or that works out of those sites as well. You may be familiar with Stateville Correctional Facility, but we have staff that are there, and they screen every individual that comes through there to identify whether they have a substance use problem or not. Oftentimes, family dialogue will come up at that time, whether it is by the offender or whether it is the staff trying to utilize the mention of family in hopes of helping the offender to acknowledge or take some responsibility for their problem and accept the help that is being offered. When we talk about family, when I think of family, I no longer think of family in the traditional sense of mother, father, bloodline relatives, so to say. Family today is those individuals. It could be a pastor. It could be a blood relative. It could be a friend, whoever those individuals are who are supportive of life change for the individual. So our definition of family has had to change because who the offender sees as family is not that traditional sense all the time.
Great, thank you. We have another question about case management and sort of the levels that you were talking about in terms of the step-down process. And they're wondering if you move people back and forth between those levels depending on the progress that you're seeing.
Absolutely. So an individual could be doing very well. They come out of the prisons or come out of treatment, they're really on fire, they're excited, they're doing all the things that they need to be doing, get a job, end up homeless as a result of divorce or a broken relationship, and that's one of those points of vulnerability where we could increase that person back from regular case management and increase them to intensity based off of this change that has happened in his life until he or she kind of balances themselves out again. So at points of death, a person can go from one level to more intensity, always up and down.
Great, thank you. We have a few questions about criminogenic risk and sort of how that's taken into account. And so I'll start with the first question and then go to the second. The first question is, are you able to take the criminogenic risk level into account when you're assigning case management levels and perhaps how many people are assigned to each case manager?
When we look at criminogenic risk, based off of high risk, high need, when we have a client who is high risk, high need, of course that case manager would have fewer clients to deal with when they're high risk, high need. Oftentimes what we find is that a supervisor will work more hand in hand with that case manager to kind of manage that high risk, high need. Keep in mind, anytime we're case managing, we work very closely, great partnership with parole and probation. Oftentimes they are making home visits with us. We cohabitate in offices with them here in the state of Illinois. So we always have them to assist us as well. So just over a period of time, TASC has been able to build these collaborative partnerships that allows us to use parole as the heavy hand, and then having TASC pre-release inside the institutions to really give us a clearer picture of what we're getting when this individual come out. So for our high-risk, high-need clients that require more case management, we do consider that with the caseload sizes of our staff. But we're not always able to make that the final. We actually pull in more weight to help that case manager versus removing that client from the case manager.
And the second part of that question is there any sort of criminogenic risk factor education that should be given to the family member who's engaged in the reentry planning process? And if so, what does that look like?
You know what, I'm unable to answer that question other than I totally agree that, yes, there should be some criminogenic education that's done with the families that should be done. I would recommend being done prior to the individual being released into the community. Spoke briefly about some of the education. So oftentimes it's hard for us in the community to penetrate into the criminal justice system, as well as it's difficult for them to provide space and all of that. I talked earlier about the difference between the criminal justice focus being safety and ours being the human service needs, and how do the two mesh. But there is a way for services in the community that reaches the family. Just as we have services in the community that's waiting for the parolee to come out or the probationer to come out, to have similar services in the community that is reaching and trying to work with those identified individuals by the parolee that they would like for us to begin working with in the community would be awesome and ideal.
Thank you. We have a question about sort of how you encourage family members to participate in this process. Is it sort of a long-term effort for engagement? Is it a question of sort of who's reaching out? For instance, have you found that it's you get more participation when case manager reaches out versus parole or probation? Maybe you could talk a little bit about what some of that process of engagement looks like with the family members.
Well, one of the processes that has begun inside is that our treatment provider inside the prison has a family reunification component. It's very small because of the staff and the dollars, but they have a family reunification component. And what they do, they try to engage family who is already visiting offenders on visitation day. And so it becomes, once they saw that we had a captured audience, these are individuals that have some interest in at least where the offender has not totally disrupted everything to the point where there's no family contact. So there's someone coming here to the institution to see the individual. We saw that as a door of opportunity. There's an open window. There's an audience. And so to begin to, when offenders realize that their visitation time could even be extended. Initially, we were taking, if you had a 2-hour visit, your first hour would be educational for the family, and then the second hour would be your visitation. Well, we decided that we would leave them with their 2-hour visitation and then just add that extra hour for family, and that's how we initially started introducing families to what their loved ones were receiving, was learning about themselves, provided a place for two-way dialogue for the offender to begin talking to family about what they've been dealing with and the progress they've been making and their goals that they're planning for once they're released in the community. Then we have another agency in the community who picked up that same group and has followed them out into the community. Now, I have found that the case managers the family has open arms and are very welcoming of the case managers and find us to be the first line of phone calls to make if something does go wrong. Anytime we've had difficulty reaching the parolee, for example, and when we call that family member within a short period of time, that parolee is either at the office or returning a phone call. So I can't say if the same is true with probation, with parole or not. But.
Thank you. We received a few questions about the common reporting document that you mentioned, and I think people are wondering if that document is publicly available.
Katie, I can make it available to you. It's not publicly available. I can provide you a copy, remove from header documents, and provide you a copy of what we use.
That sounds great. Thank you. And for those of you on the webinar who asked that question, we can touch base with Linda afterwards and see if there's something that we can send to everybody when we send out the link to the recording of the webinar as well. So we have a few questions on some of your comments regarding involving the client in the reentry process and the efforts. And so maybe if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about how the client is involved, maybe what some of that involvement looks like, some of the feedback that they might be providing, et cetera.
Okay. The client's involvement starts at what I referred to earlier as our receiving and classification unit. When the offender comes through our receiving unit for it to be determined which parent prison institution is going to house them, they are screened at that point and given the choice of whether they want drug treatment based off of an assessment tool, a brief assessment tool that we use to determine abuse or dependence. They are identified, told that you meet the criteria. Are you interested? Explain briefly about what the program is, where it is they're going to be going, what they should expect, as well as they are informed that your treatment will be pretty emotional. You're going to be required to get up and you're going to do 15 hours of group every week. You're required to either go to work or go to school the other half of the day. You won't have any visits for the first 30 days until you make it through the orientation. And then we're going to require at least 90 days of treatment from you in the community upon your release. Do you want this or don't you? So that's where the parolee first began, the client first began having some input. Once they agree and are actually at one of our drug treatment prisons, they will do their treatment there for, say, the prison actually only holds up to 36 months. So if your sentence is longer than 36 months, you wouldn't be sent there. But if you're sent there, you will do treatment up until probably the last 4 months. 4 months prior to your release. Everything that you have been working on, whether it was vocational, whether you obtained your GED in there, whether you did forklift operating, whether you did culinary arts, whatever your progress was in treatment, if you attended anger management, parenting, all of the last, from the time you left the receiving up until 120 days prior to your release, all of that information is brought to what we call our 120-day staffing, which is our multidisciplinary staffing. At the multidisciplinary staffing, we're going to have representatives from every aspect of this person's life since the time that they were incarcerated. So any services they were involved in. We will have someone there from the healthcare unit, someone there from mental health, someone there from academics, someone there from vocational. Their treatment counselor and or supervisor will be there. A task case manager will be there, and a Department of Corrections counselor or case manager will be there, as well as the offender. So all are at the table, and when it's at that point that everybody bring their copy, their pages of how this individual, they're part of the picture. so to say, or they're part of the puzzle. They bring that to this 120-day staffing, and we go around the table and we read this information off, and the offender hears it. We ask the offender if you have any questions, anything you want to add. Do you think this speaks true? Is there anything you would like to add to it? In that staffing, that 120-day staffing, the treatment provider who has had more hands-on contact with that offender than anybody during his stay in that prison or institution makes a recommendation for the level of care this person should receive, the level of treatment they should continue with in the community. The individual understands that based off of their progress while incarcerated, I am being referred to reside at a recovery home instead of at my family's home, and they understand why they're not being sent home to their fiance or to their mom's house or to their wife. I'm required to stay at this recovery home for 90 days. While I'm residing at this recovery home, I'm required to do outpatient groups at this facility. 25 hours of groups within the first 90 days. So they understand that work is not going to be a priority, the top priority. It is a priority, but it's not the top priority. So they understand that they sign off on that. They identify for themselves short-term, long-term goals. They provide us at that time with some collateral contact information, who it is we can contact when we're having problems getting a hold of them. Other information we gather. So we gather all of that, and what we found is when an individual disagrees with that continuing care plan and their recommendation for reentry into the community, when they disagree, they will oftentimes say to us, well, my wife needs me home, or whomever is waiting for me to come home. I have to go home for this reason or that reason. We have them sign a collateral contact form, the consent form that allows us to actually be able to call that wife, that family member, that friend, whomever it is. Even sometimes they will tell us I have a job. And so they give us the information and the sign-off that we need to be able to make that contact in the community. When we call the wife or whomever the person is, and we inform them that this is the illness that your family member has, this is the treatment that they've received, and this is our recommendation for you receiving back the best person you can get in 90 days. Oftentimes, that family member will say, well, take him. He can go for 6 months. So that's kind of where the offender is involved. He does have some input. He does not have the final say about where his treatment plan, what it's going to look like in the community. He does have some input about what the goals are, what his goals, his long-term and short-term goals. But those goals he comes up with them, and then the case manager kind of guides him in helping them to prioritize or even to remove certain goals and add new ones. So, hope that helps.
That's very helpful. Thank you. One of the things that you touched on that we've been getting some questions about is this information sharing and this multidisciplinary staffing. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that process of sort of establishing relationships. One of the things that we hear a lot is that the information sharing process can be very difficult with all these sorts of different entities involved. And so just wondering if you could say a few comments on the importance of it, as well as maybe how some of those relationships were established and people agreed to share some of that information.
With the here in Illinois, I do realize we have a unique situation. We have two fully dedicated drug treatment prisons here. Between the two of them, we hold about 2,000 inmates in those facilities. One of the requirements when they set the prisons up as drug treatment prisons was that they have a list of contracted treatment providers or community resources that they have contracted with to provide certain services to our population upon entry into the community. However, the client, let me just go back. The document I talked about, that 8-pager, 9-pager, our common document, that document is disseminated by task to all the various parties. They bring it all to the 120-day staffing. When they bring it all to the 120-day staffing, task takes that information and they go back and they sit down with the offender who's about to be released now, probably within the next 90 days, and they say, hey, this is the recommendation from that last meeting we were in with you. You heard what everybody said. Here's a list of recovery homes that the Department of Corrections will pay for. Which one do you want to go to? So again, client gets some choice about not necessarily the level of care, but which facility within that level of care he or she will go to. Once the offender decides where it is they would like to reside and where they would like to receive their treatment at, task case manager actually goes back into their office and calls and sets up the bed space and the treatment space for that client. All of that information that has been collected, the assessment that was originally done upon entry into the drug treatment prison, as well as this common document, is all faxed out to parole, and it is also faxed out to the treatment providers that will be receiving that client upon release. So that is some of how we do. Now, the relationships, a lot of the relationships, the collaboration, one, task, I think, just our history. Task has been around a long time. Our role is that of an advocate and that of a liaison. We are not a treatment provider. Therefore, it becomes easier for treatment providers and various agencies to work with us. Because we are not providing the same services. Our thing is to connect the client to their services. So oftentimes the relationships are easier for us to build because the expectation is that hopefully we will learn about their agencies the more they share, that we will learn about their agencies and hence in return refer individuals to those agencies. I think another thing that has helped with the partnerships has been the fact that many of us have the common, we work up under the common contract of the Department of Corrections, which has pre-contracted with certain providers to provide these services. We grew up, I'll say task, grew up working in collaboration with parole and probation. So they see us as well as a partner. I've been with TASK about 7-8 years now, and those partnerships were in place and when I got here, and they are absolutely amazing to see parole be the heavy hand for us at times to make sure that parolees are doing what they need to do, that they're respecting staff, that they're staying focused on their goals, parole agents who are willing to come in and drop clients for us. Parole agents who are willing to go with us to the treatment provider to see a client. So, we'll do multi-disciplinary staffing, sometimes even at the treatment provider, So I think some of it comes about as a result of flexibility and really just reaching across the table and saying, hey, this is how we can be of service to you. What is it you need? And then saying to them, this is what we need. So for our clients that come to your agency, this is the report that we're going to need back. And this is the access that the case managers need to the clients that we have that are here at your agency. So just that common back and forth with expectation. And there are times when every now and then we do go in and sit down with a given provider to kind of reset the expectation because we value the relationships that we have.
Great, thank you. We're going to do one more question, and then we'll go into the last slide and wrap up. So for the last question, just wanted to mention, a lot of the people on the webinar today work with jails and short stay populations, and so just wondering if you could say a few words, about those who might not be able to do the 120 days prior to release. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about some of the importance of still doing some of those in-reach activities prior to release, even if you don't have those 120 days.
Right. Whatever the window of notification is, and sometimes I realize that window is as short as learning today that he's getting out tonight. And in those cases, it becomes important to have the information that's needed to be able to reach this individual, whether it be a family member in the community that he's giving you access to. What you may want to look at what type of assessments you're doing upon entry into the jail to find out, to make sure that you're capturing the information needed to be able to pull together a quick discharge or continuing care plan. It all depends upon whether you have an arm that's still out in the community. For those of us who don't have an arm, a part of our work that's in the community will have those resources that are already out there that we've established where I can call in the middle of the night and say, look, I have a client that's getting out tomorrow morning. Can I send him your way, or can I call you to find out if he shows up? It's important to begin establishing those relationships even within the jails if you are providing transitional, or to say that you're doing a reentry. There has to be some type of a connection or follow-through even when it can't happen before he leaves. It needs to happen shortly thereafter. I failed to mention that our case management model for anyone being released from the prisons that are part of our that are being case managed by our staff, they are required to stay put. They cannot leave the facility where they are paroled to for 72 hours. They have to stay put until a task case manager comes and a parole agent. They understand that when they get out, that the very first call they make is to parole, and the very second call they make is to be to task. And so how can you put something similar? You don't have to have the bigger window, but how can you make some connections with the probation officers? Do you know who that probation officer is going to be, and what type of reporting and communication is in place?
Great, thank you. I appreciate that. For those of you who had questions that we were unable to get to, you can please feel free to email me at the address you see on your screen, as well as if you have any other questions about the webinar content, or any questions about the National Reentry Resource Center as well. And just as a reminder, we will be we have recorded this webinar and we'll be posting the link to the recording early next week, and that link will be sent to you as well. We want to remind you that ATTC has a multitude of resources. The ones you see on the screen are particularly relevant to this webinar series that we've been doing, so you should feel free to check those out as well. This concludes today's webinar. After you exit the webinar, a brief survey is going to appear on your screen, and by answering the questions in the survey, you will be helping the Reentry Resource Center improve on the services we offer. So we greatly appreciate it if you would take a few minutes to complete the survey so we can improve upon the work and make these webinars even more relevant to your work moving forward. As I mentioned, we're going to email a link to the recording of this presentation as well as a link to the PDF of the PowerPoint slides. These will be on our website, which is www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. I also encourage you to sign up again for our newsletter as well. I want to thank you all again for participating. Special thanks to Mrs. Linda Gasson-Rowe for her wonderful comments and conversation at the end. I greatly appreciate your time. Thought it was fantastic. Want to also thank, of course, Task, who Linda is with, as well as the Addiction Technology Transfer Center Network and the Bureau of Justice Assistance, all for the partnership that brought you today's webinar. Thank you again, and we look forward to having you all on another webinar soon.